Thank you very much for choosing this session on solar geoengineering, in which I will give you a sort of story in the nutshell of my upcoming book, Dimming the Sun, which will come out in the US early next year, 25. If you still have optimism, possibly that's a very recent video by Trump.
So many bad things have happened to our country, but we're going to turn it around, and I think we can do it fast. We're going to drill, and we're going to be drilling like you have never seen before.
So this is on the campaign trail, 2 weeks old. Well, possibly we won't have him, or the world won't see him as the next US president, but it's a high likelihood. And it's not only about the US who might take back their promises. UK has done it. India is basically struggling by far not meeting the targets they've set, so they think about cutting down their promises. So basically what it all comes to, are we screwed? Man, it quite looks like we all know this. However, we might then, if we are screwed, consider something called solar geoengineering, which is controversial. Of course, it is controversial. Why is it controversial? Well, it's fairly easy to do, and it's fairly cheap, and we fairly know how to do it. Why do we know it? Because not only we as humans could do it, but also because nature does it. Solar geoengineering, or at least the most discussed approach to it, is basically doing what volcanoes do once in a while. They shoot up heaps of sulfur dioxide in the stratosphere. The sulfur then creates a thin layer of an aerosol very up in the air, about 18 kilometers altitude, and then reflects sunlight back into space before it comes down to Earth. And that is what solar geoengineering is. It's basically reducing the solar forcing in order to sort of countervail the greenhouse effect. Well, please mark these words. Solar geoengineering is not a solution. If it comes down to the fact that we'll do it, it is only a stopgap solution. It is only a stopgap solution that can help us to transition to the post-fossil age. What's a stopgap solution? Think about, I don't know, you're on the high seas in a sailboat and you have a hole in the boat. Well, fixing the hole provisionally so that you can make it back on land is probably a good idea, but it'll still mean that you have to fix the boat for good if you want to keep on sailing. Solar geoengineering is only a stopgap solution if we consider it as being one possibility to gain time, to buy us time in order to avoid the worst. This is sort of the most, or best known napkin diagram of solar geoengineering, which basically brings that buys us time idea in a fairly understandable metric. So this is what happens if we don't cut emissions. We do cut emissions, hopefully as aggressive as we could ever be. We could be more aggressive about it, but well, we're still making progress. So unless you really believe that you can really lower this down, this line down in a very short amount of time, or not scale up CO2 removal, sucking CO2 out of the air, scale those technologies that exist, but which are very expensive and very hard to scale right now, you should consider to cap the average temperature of the world somewhere around 1.8 to 2 degrees Celsius, and use the time you've in to cut aggressively and remove at scale. That is the only scenario in which solar geoengineering can make sense, but it might be at some point, or might become the best option we have to not enter a world 2.5 degrees, not risking to hit the tipping points, and not risking to have this cascade of tipping points kicking in. From all what we know, the risks, from what the models say, are not as big as often claimed, especially, and that's what the responsible part of the solar geoengineering community always claims, particularly if you start doing it very slowly with low amounts and really measure well what happens. So, at least in geophysical, ecological risks, this seems, from what we know today, and we need more research here, fairly manageable. But there are other risks, and there are more light in human nature, and that's the technical term a lot of climate economists would use, the moral hazard. That basically means, in simple words, we humans are very good in finding excuses for ourselves to not do things that are hard to do. So the moral hazard about solar geoengineering is basically thinking, oh, now we have a silver bullet, let's not decarbonize, at least not as fast as we should do. And that is obviously a problem, and that is a problem that has to be addressed every single time people talk about solar geoengineering, has to, of course, reflect on what does it mean if people like Newt Gingrich and say, excellent solution. We should remind them that it's only a stopgap. It's definitely not a quick fix, because if we start doing it, and if we don't decarbonize, or keep on decarbonizing, or even decarbonize ideally faster than we do, we'd have to put more sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere year by year. And definitely then come to the point where the whole approach definitely becomes far too risky. We need the science, we need the knowledge in order to enter into rational decision making. It'll be a hard decision to do it or not to do it. But good decisions are those that are good or well-informed decisions. And then we need an answer to the question, who should do it? Most likely, or in an ideal scenario, a large majority of all countries of the world in the UN came together and would find a global governance structure, would find criteria that would enable rational decision-making based on research. In a world as divided as the one we are living in, that sounds on the one hand very optimistic. On the other hand, climate policy is one of the very few areas where there seems to be global understanding. So I hope for that. I think there are signals in the present that with rising temperatures, the world in the UN would be able to come together and think rationally about the question if we should do it or if we should not do it. Would it be too risky? Well, I don't know. Everybody who claims who would know it is a charlatan. We can't know it from today's perspective. We don't have the research yet. But what I know is it'll be a risk versus risk scenario. It is risky to do it. But how risky is it? Basically, always repeating that, we have to decarbonize and we still believe in the Paris process, while knowing we won't decarbonize fast enough. Very likely not. I mean, miracles aside. That's a famous quote within the solar geoengineering community. It's a bad idea whose time has come. It hasn't come yet. But in the 30s, 40s, around the mid-century, it is very likely that humanity will say, yeah, it's a bad idea, but we have to do it. Because if we don't do it, things will get worse. The world will go off the rails. And a coalition of sub-Saharan states or whatever will not accept to not do it. We all know there's no planet B. On planet A, if you do it, or if you don't do solar geoengineering, the decision will affect every single human, and not only every single human, every single plant, and every single animal, any single species on this world. So, we should start this debate, science-based, rationally, and while looking for government structures, global government structures that could make sense. And we should consider it now, because possibly, if we don't start doing it, if we don't start the research right now, we'll end up in a world where somebody will do it, but in an irresponsible way. Thank you very much.